welcome back to another episode of the Rebel Love podcast. Today, my guest is Tana Espino, love and relationship coach and founder of Love's Hustle. She guides women in healing codependency and anxiety in relationships so that they can begin to deepen their values, strengthen their confidence, and get real about love. Through her personal journey with codependency, she's made it her passion to help others go from anxiety and push and pull partners into peacefully secure relationships, even if they've struggled with love their whole lives. Welcome, Tana.
Thank you, Talia, for having me on.
Oh, I'm so glad you are here. I'm really excited to have this episode because today we're going to talk about anxious attachment and codependency.
Yes.
Which I feel is kind of probably more common than we'd think, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it is. It is. Absolutely.
Before we get started, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today, and if codependency or anxiety was part of that journey.
Absolutely. Yes. The reason why I'm so passionate about helping women is because it was part of my journey. From a very young age, back-to-back relationships, didn't even realize that it was, this anxious attachment mixed with codependency. And it wasn't until a significant breakup several years back where I realized, whoa, I have this pattern. And I read up on anxious attachment, was reading up on codependency, and everything was resonating with me. And from there, it's when I started my journey into that and really helping women specifically heal through that based on what I found worked in healing that and shifting that. And it's that connection back to yourself and that connection with your body and all of that, which I had an amazing somatic therapist help me through that process. And that was the big, whoa, because I'm oh, wait a second, the anxiety is stored in my body. Oh, this relational trauma or emotional wounds are all in my body. And so I've been disconnected from my body for so long and disconnected from my intuition and all of that. So that was wow, okay. Connection back to the body. That's very key here, especially when we're talking about codependency and anxious attachment.
Light bulb moment. So with the book, how did that journey get started? Did somebody give you the book and then you read it and you were like, oh my gosh, I'm reading about myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. A friend gave me the book and it wasn't even a book to hey, you need to read this because I think you have this. It was oh, I'm reading this book. It's so insightful. I want to share it with other people. I think she had finished reading it and she gave it to me and I'm oh, okay, cool. Let's see what this is about. Codependency. I don't even know what that is. And it was the book Codependent No More was the name of the book and I was reading it. I was oh my gosh, whoa, this, I could relate to this. What's going on? And I read it, but I put it down. I read it. It resonated, but I was still also in a relationship where I was very anxiously attached as well. So I didn't really take any action from there. I just knew that it resonated with me. It wasn't until I noticed my anxiety was getting to a point where it was not healthy that I was I need to do something about this because I've been reading and I've been doing everything. And that's when I sought out a somatic therapist to work with the body. And honestly, I didn't know really what that was going to be like. But yeah, it just kind of opened up this whole new world for me.
Yeah, I bet. Okay. So before we move any further, there's a lot of words getting thrown around it. And just for our listeners that may not know what these words are, let's clarify some things. So first of all, can you define for us what codependency is?
Yes.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. So codependency is, and this word, it developed way back in the 70s, and it was first called co-alcoholics because it was to describe the partner of somebody who had substance use and alcoholism. In the 80s, with the author of Codependent No More, Melody Beatty, she coined the term codependent. Instead of co-alcoholic. And now people started using the word codependent to not just describe the partner of someone with substance abuse, but just in general, a person who gets into that fixer, savior, rescuer role, puts their needs last, everyone else's needs first, for the purpose of maintaining like stability in the relationship. So in this case, if we're talking about romantic relationships, for the purpose of maintaining the romantic relationship, almost feeling really good to feel needed by the partner. Mm-hmm. In this case, usually a partner tends to have some sort of like distress, or maybe even substance use, or maybe a mental illness. Something's going on with the partner that then the woman, in this case, I'm talking about the person here, she might want to get into that role of wanting to fix and help and forget about her needs and actually lose herself in her partner, because she seeks or she finds her worth in feeling needed and being that rescuer. And so that's kind of like how that, gets into with romantic relationships. But it starts in childhood. In childhood, it would have, this codependency, in childhood, it would have, usually it starts in childhood. There's, not always, but most of the time it starts in childhood, where there was probably in your family system some instability, some unpredictability, something where you felt like you needed to take care of the needs of others and maintain that like balance in the family system.
Right.
And so from there, then it grows, and then you see it come out in all types of relationships, not just romantic, but in this case, because I specialize with the romantic relationships, like that's what I'm referring to here.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is fascinating, because what I'm hearing is like, so perhaps codependent people get something out of it in terms of some of their needs met. I can't think of the word, not intellectual, but emotional needs.
Yes, right, exactly. Because in childhood, their emotional needs, right, as children have these needs to feel seen and heard and acknowledged and validated, and to feel valued and special and loved and safe and protected, like all these like needs. And if that's not happening, then unconsciously, then in partnerships, you seek to get that need met. Mm-hmm. Although you're not really getting it met though. You're working for it, because your partner, usually your partner is going to be someone who cannot meet that need for you. So it's almost like you're working for love, you're performing for love, like you're doing all the things, and you're unfortunately not getting that need that you're seeking. You're not getting it met. There's a sense of void and discomfort and anxiety internally. So then that person seeks externally in the form of a relationship of trying to feel needed, but it's not going to fill that need. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So a couple more words before we get into the more nitty gritty is, let's define anxiety, and let's also define, there was one other word you said before that I cannot.
Somatic therapy?
Yes. Somatic therapy. I'd love to go into what that is as well. Thanks so much.
Yes. Yeah. So in the context of like anxiety and anxious attachment, right? So anxiety when someone's feeling anxious, they're not trusting what's happening externally. They feel like they need to control whatever's going on, right? They feel like they need to prepare and anticipate for the worst, waiting for that other shoe to drop, or, and so in relationships, when we're talking about anxious attachment, usually that person is in their fight or flight response. They're in that survival state of like, oh my gosh, I have to do something about this thing right now. And that's the anxiety. It's like, there's something that I need to do and to fix and to plan ahead and do all these things so that this terrible thing that I think is going to happen won't happen. Right. So there's a lot of like these worried thoughts that go through the person's mind. So with anxious attachment in relationships, it looks like, when you feel that your partner is maybe emotionally or physically distancing themselves, you're wanting to attach because you feel safest attaching to the partner. You don't feel safe when there has been this gap or this period of like, we're going to say space in between, right? Like, let's say you don't hear from him for a few hours. Someone with a high anxious attachment might start to wonder, oh my gosh, what's going on? I need to call him. I need to text him. Or they're checking their phone every few minutes. They haven't heard back. And like, then there's a need for them to want to figure out what's wrong. Did I say something wrong? Is he mad at me? What's happening? And so there's a lot of that anxiety in relationships as well. Wow. I mean, there's so much more to that, but I'm just giving like the little bullet point summary.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting. That sounds absolutely exhausting. Yeah. I really, it's funny actually. I mean, I don't know if I've experienced anxiety to the level that other people have, because I was living with a friend temporarily in Toronto, and I had not seen anxiety in the works until I lived with her. And it was only temporary. It was like a month we were living together, but I could not believe the level of worry, the constant worry.
Yeah.
And I guess I just never seen it before. So I just didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how it manifested. And I just kept thinking, I was trying to be there for her, and, but it was such a irrational level
exactly.
Of worry. Yeah. Like you say, the fight or flight. And I can just imagine the tension in your body all the time and what that does to your kind of, I don't know if it's adrenals or cortisol or.
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of clients that I work with that when they've been in this survival state, this anxiety for such a long time, and such a long time, I'm using that like kind of loosely because each person's body is so different. It just depends. But when they've been in that state for a while, they have some type of physical ailment. Maybe they get constant headaches, or maybe they have a lot of like pain or tension in their back area, or maybe like they have like stomach issues or something. There's something, heartburn, like there's something that usually that they have some sort of physical ailment in relation to being in this anxiety for such a long time.
Yeah, it definitely, it makes sense that you would. And oh my gosh. Okay. So let's actually, I kind of want to stay on this train of thought. So if somebody is in that, first of all, you were kind of lucky you found this book, and then you had an aha moment. And I think when you come to those moments on your own, those are the most powerful, rather than somebody kind of shoving it down your throat or suggesting things, because then there's this resistance that comes up. But when it's you with a book, it's like, oh my God, it's like a big slap in the face, isn't it? And you're like, I did not realize this whole time. And so it's this whole, your perspective shifts. So what if somebody doesn't give us a book, but we tend to realize, okay, maybe we realize the physical ailments. So like you said, I've got headaches. I am just feeling super stressed all the time. I'm aware of my anxiety, but I don't know how to wrangle it. I don't know what to do about it. Where do we kind of go from there?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's so much even with that, but the main piece is like that awareness, right? Like, oh my gosh, I notice each time this happens, my stomach gets in knots, or I can't, or I don't have an appetite when I'm anxious, or like I'm just, I have these physical ailments or whatever it might be, or my mind is consumed with just thinking that I can't sleep at night because, if we're talking about relationships, right? Like, I haven't heard from him, or I don't know if he likes me, or what if he leaves me, or, just all these thoughts, right? So you are wanting to bring it back into the body to start noticing what's happening internally. Like, where do you notice the anxiety, right? Is it coming up in knots in your stomach, or is it coming up with like your heart racing, right? And just kind of just becoming aware of the sensations in your body. However, one of the things with this though is that sometimes even doing that might bring up even more anxiety, right? If we've been disconnected from our bodies for a long time, right? Because we've been just focused on everyone else but ourselves, actually going inward, it might feel a little bit scary at times. We might not want to do that. So I always say, work on it like a little bit at a time. Just feel in, just pause and just notice like where is the anxiety in my body? Because emotions, traumas, anxieties, depression, all of that stress, it's stored in the body. It's not going to be in the mind. Yes, you're going to have thoughts, but it's going to be in the body. So addressing the body first and just kind of going inward and just being curious about it. Like, oh, that's interesting. My heart is racing right now because I noticed that it's been an hour and he hasn't texted me back yet or something, right? So just tapping into it, even just a little bit, because it can feel overwhelming if you start sensing all of the feelings inside. So even just being curious a little bit and just noticing, I'd maybe start there, just noticing a little bit like, oh, that's interesting. I noticed that I don't have an appetite right now, or my stomach feels in knots a little bit, and just doing that. And then that's it. And just not overwhelming your body, but then maybe even finding something that might help you, like a coping skill, something that helps you maybe bring that anxiety down a little bit. A healthy coping skill. I always maybe start there.
Mm-hmm.
That could be lots of things. That could be, it could be like, you know what, I'm going to put on one of my favorite shows that always like maybe like cheers me up. It could be something like that, right? It could be, you know what, I'm going to call a friend right now, and just maybe take my mind off of it a little bit. Maybe I'm going to go out for a walk. Maybe I'm going to do some movement, some yoga, put some music on and do some dancing. Some type of coping skill. And the coping skill is more so something that helps in the moment, doesn't necessarily make it like it's like the cure, but it's just something that in the moment it helps. The main thing is going to be slowly getting back into the connection with your body and the sensations.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. I think noticing is kind of the first step to any really lasting change, right?
Yeah. And actually one of the things too, now that I'm thinking about it as well, it's like, even journaling on, before you get into that anxious mode, just journaling on what are some of the triggers that you notice that get you to feel some of this anxiety in your relationship. If we're talking about relationships here, like what are some of the triggers, and then almost making like a plan for yourself. Like, oh, okay, notice when I don't hear back from him, that's one of my triggers. Or when he is silent with me, when I say something, that's a trigger. Like kind of marking down what are some of the triggers, and then what are some of the things that have helped you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whether, like I said, like the healthy coping, and also adding a little bit in there, like starting to get familiar with the sensations in your body, starting to connect back little by little with yourself.
I think this is really interesting talking about this in the context of romantic relationships specifically, because sometimes I think there's a fine line, right? You're like, sometimes you are with somebody who is untrustworthy. So what you're thinking is just, but then it's like, okay, where is that line where it's me being particularly anxious, or that person being, untrustworthy and engaging in untrustworthy behavior.
Right.
So, it can become blurred. And I think it's important to understand what that healthy relationship looks like. So then we can separate the two and go, okay, hang on. What part of this is me,
Right. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is so important. Because yes, it could be that your partner maybe is, has some unhealthy ways of connecting with you. Mm-hmm. And that's why, your anxious attachment gets activated, because anxious attachment isn't something necessarily that you're experiencing 24/7. It's going to get activated in the context of relationships and in the context of a quote unquote perceived type of threat. That threat, again, for someone with anxious is more so if I notice that my partner is maybe emotionally or physically distancing, and then you start thinking like, are they mad at me? And is he going to break up with me? And like this fear of the abandonment and rejection. So then that's when it gets activated. And so, yes, if there is a partner who, or actually let's start with, what does that healthy relationship look like, right? Mm-hmm. A partner that is going to be responsive to you, right? Meaning that like they're present, like they hear you out when you're talking to them about your worries or like your feelings, like they're able to be there for you emotionally, right? Maybe that looks like hearing you out, like just, letting you know that it makes sense. They're not invalidating your feelings or what you're bringing up. A healthy partnership also looks like, both of you being able to take in what your partner is maybe needing from you, or maybe taking accountability and kind of just being able to hear. This goes both ways, right? Being able to hear your partner out, like taking that pause and reflecting about maybe what your partner is sharing in regards to maybe something that they notice about you that maybe upset them. And then you're able to reflect, right? And make compromises where needed. And in order for the sake of the relationship, right? And it's a lot to do with trust as well, right? Do I trust that my partner is going to be there for me with whatever I'm bringing to the table? And it's not going to be met with criticism or judgment or invalidation of how I'm feeling, right? And also, is my partner accessible? Like, it goes back to, can I trust them and rely on them? And are they consistent? Like, are they accessible to me? Like, or is it that like they only share about their stuff and I never get a chance to talk about how I'm feeling? Or I always feel like that they're taking over and that I have to somehow, attend to their needs, and my needs don't feel like they're being met in the relationship.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's just so many things coming up for me. I'm like,
there's so much.
There is so much. Yeah. And active listening and being able to like you said, if somebody is not, if your needs aren't being met, being able to bring that up with them and feel okay about it. And I think, feeling safe. So. Yeah. And I think so with the trust thing, it's like, examining that and going, do I not trust them because they've given me a reason not to trust them?
Right.
Or do I not trust them because of my own baggage that I'm bringing into the relationship?
Exactly. Yeah. And right. So one of the things that's important then is to identify what are my values and what are my standards in the relationship. Like, so values and standards go together. So what is it that I value that I am practicing too, and that I would want my partner, or if you're single, like future partner, to also have maybe similar values of like, such as that could look like values of like someone who is always, or not always, but like just someone who's emotionally available, right? Someone who is honest, someone who, you're making a list of these values or qualities that you're looking for your, like getting to know yourself, like your own, what are your own values? Do you value spirituality? So then do you want to get with a partner who also values that? Or if not, like, is it going to create a conflict there? So listing your values, and then from your values, then what are the standards based on your values? So standards, if let's say we're going with like a value that's important for someone, maybe the spirituality is an example. So maybe a standard for that woman or for that person looks like, I practice my spirituality, and I'd love to have a partner who practices spirituality as well. And that's like my standard in the relationship. So if there's someone that comes along that doesn't meet that value, because if it's a value, then it's important to you and it's something that necessarily shouldn't be compromised, right? Does my standard match like this person, or the list that you've made, right, of values? There's things that you can compromise, yes. And then there's other things that for you are like, no, these are like my non-negotiables, right? And so then from there, you kind of assess like, okay, am I in this right relationship? Does it resonate with me? Does it align with how I'm living my life and the values and the standards, or does it not, right? So if I value honesty, but this person has lied to me a few times, it doesn't match up to my standards that I've set for myself. My standard is that I date people that are honest, and this person maybe has lied, regardless of what the lie is, right? Has lied maybe once or a few times. And so then this isn't aligning with what my value is and my standards.
And so almost like I don't trust them.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't trust your word. Yeah. It sucks, doesn't it? When you're like, I really want to trust you, but you keep giving me reasons not to trust you. And like, yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to, okay, hang on. If someone says something and they are telling the truth and you're not trusting them, going, okay, again, is this my own stuff, or is this really happening? It's kind of like sometimes you feel like you're going, especially if you've been gaslighted, you feel like you're going a little bit crazy. You're like, oh my gosh.
Right. And that gets messy. Absolutely, because that is like a skewed perception of your reality. Because now you're like, wait a second, like, oh, okay. Like it just knocks you off. You don't feel grounded. It just,
Okay, so I love this. We're bringing it back to like, what can we do in this situation? What are we in control of? Because we can only change our own behavior.
Exactly. So the piece here is how are you getting to know yourself, right? So getting to know yourself in the sense of, starting off with, well, what are my values? And let's say you don't even know what that is. Like, starting off with, what is it that I need, right? So what is it that I need for myself so this is like a daily practice that I share with my clients, like to start to get the ball rolling of like how to connect back with yourself. If you're just like, I don't know what my needs are, and I don't know then what I'm going to need in a relationship because I'm not too sure about my needs. So it's slowly getting connected with checking in with yourself. Like, what is it that I need for myself today, right now? After work, I'm going to like transition from work to home. So what is it that I need for myself? You could start off with like physical needs. If you're like that disconnected, right, from yourself, like starting off with like physical needs, like did I eat today? Did I drink water? Am I tired? Second step, is this going to nourish me? Whatever it is that you decide to do. So if you need to rest, right? And the way you're going to rest is by taking a nap. Like, is this going to nourish me? Yes, probably it will. And step number 3 is honoring the commitment, keeping that promise to yourself. Keeping promises to ourselves develops that like self-trust, and like slowly we start to get connected back to ourselves. Yeah. By doing like, even just starting off there, if someone's been very disconnected from themselves, just starting off with like every day checking in. What do I need? Well, is this going to nourish me? And then, following through with a commitment. From there, I find it helpful in regards to what even values are. Maybe, and unfortunately, I can't think off the top of my head some books, but just even a list of like, what are values? Like even like Google it, or like, reading up on what do values mean for myself, right? And again, if you've been really disconnected from yourself, that you need more guidance and support, just reading a list of like, oh, okay, these are values and qualities. Oh, okay, let me see which one of these maybe aligns with me. And then starting from there, making that list, and then,
Yeah, awesome. This is so helpful. And I think you saying the part about, honoring your word and keeping your word to yourself, because that brings it back to the trust, right? Maybe I can't trust other people because I can't even trust my own word. If I keep breaking my word to myself, then I'm projecting that into the world. I don't even trust me. So why would I trust you? So,
exactly. Yes, exactly.
So what is it like? I love that we're on this train, and I feel like there's so much good stuff to talk about here.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between codependency and anxious attachment? And what is anxious attachment? Because I know we talked about anxiety, but what's anxious attachment?
Yeah. So the difference here is that codependency is something that's learned. It does have an essence of like survival because it's learned in childhood. And again, it goes back into that like I need to adjust and adapt to what my parents are available or not available for based on what's happening. And I feel like I need to take care of others' needs in my family in order for me to survive, right? If things are chaotic or stressful, or maybe I have a parent who maybe had a physical illness or mental illness, or they were always working, or again, there was substance abuse, or there was something happening, then that's usually when the codependency develops, because then you're trying to find, because your needs aren't being met, right? You're trying to find a way to get your needs met. You're trying to find a way to adapt. And then the way to adapt is like, well, let me see then how do I like anticipate the problems and meet everyone else's needs so that I feel needed in this role and all of that, right? So that's like the codependency that's developed in childhood. Anxious attachment, and there are different types of attachment. So we'll start with anxious attachment. That's something that's developed as an adaptive way to survive in infancy. So it's developed in infancy up until like 18 months or so, right? That's like the core of it, where the attachment system is for survival, to adapt, to survive. So let's talk about with someone with an anxious attachment style as an infant, they might have had a caregiver who was inconsistent in the way that they connected and attuned and attached to that infant for many reasons. And I always like to share with my clients, like, we're not blaming or shaming or judging parents in the way or the family system in the way it showed up. It's just we're wanting to get the information so that we know and we have context around, like, oh, that's what happened, right? And to get information. So it's not about blaming parents or anything, but you might have had a parent for whatever reason that wasn't consistent. Generational trauma. It could be that parent had like postpartum depression, or maybe they were just always stressed or working, or, different reasons why that parent wasn't able to consistently attune or attach to that infant. So then the infant starts noticing or starts, infants are going to adapt to what their parents are available for. So that infant notices unconsciously, like, oh, my parent, in this case, let's just say mother, she's not always going to be here. So I have to find a way to get her attention, right? So I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to make sure that I cling on to this connection, because it's scary without the connection. So I might cry, I might get fussy, I might try to smile and get her attention and do things so that she can connect with me, because I don't know the next time when I'm going to get it. So then I'm just going to try to like constantly do that so that I can ensure that I'm going to get something at some point, like connection wise, right?
Yeah, really interesting.
And it's to survive, because the baby wants to connect in order. I mean, we need the connection to survive. So it's like a survival adaptation that happens for the anxious attachment style. And then again, it's not the attachment styles aren't fixed. They like transform and morph and change and all of that, depending on just your life experiences and the relationships that you get into. So it'll shift, but you might have a prominent one, right? If it's anxious attachment, or maybe another attachment style as well.
Okay. Wow. Oh my God. I feel like that we could totally just go forever here.
Oh, there's yeah.
Okay. So I know that in a previous conversation we were discussing that there's different types of attachments. For example, anxious attachment, which we just discussed, secure attachment, avoidant attachments.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly go over what these are? And like, I know you said that they kind of morph from one to another.
Yes. And I wanted to also bring up too, just with the codependency and anxious attachment, the thing that they do have in common, because one is activated. So one is like something that's learned, a behavior, right? Which is the codependency. And that's just kind of there in relationships and all of that. And the anxious attachment is activated in the context of the relationship, right? When it sees a perceived threat. So someone can have the codependent patterns and behaviors and have a different type of attachment, which it could be like an avoidant attachment. So let's talk about avoidant attachment then and the different attachment styles. So someone with an avoidant attachment style, their threat is going to be someone getting emotionally close to them and vulnerable. So for them, that feels unsafe. And so they're going to want to pull away, right? They're going to want to distance themselves. And when that happens, when you have someone who has an anxious and avoidant attachment style, then you see this dance of the distancer pursuer. Like then the anxious one is like, well, I want to cling on here. I feel like I'm losing the connection here, and I want to hold on tighter then, because I notice that my partner is emotionally or physically pulling away. And that person with the avoidant, they feel safe pulling away, because maybe as an infant, they probably had a parent who, again, for many different reasons, who was consistently not available emotionally to them, not attuning to them, maybe that parent was depressed. Like there's numerous reasons. So consistently there was a misattunement or neglect. And so then again, that infant, their role is to adjust to the parents, whatever the parent's available for. So the infant knows, my mom isn't available to attune to me, right? This is all unconscious, right? My mom isn't available to attune to me. So in order for me to help her, because I know she's not available to attune, I'm not going to make a big fuss. I'm not going to seek her. It's probably just safer for me not to reach out and seek, because I'm not going to get it in return. And I'm doing this for the sake of her, because I know that she can't do this for me. So then in relationships, that manifests as like, I don't even know what needs are. I don't even need needs, right? I don't have needs. I'm not going to ask for support. I'm very independent and self-sufficient. And then the moment that there's like this closeness, emotional closeness, that's too much, because I don't know what that's like, because I didn't have that growing up. So that feels kind of scary. I don't want anyone to depend on me or anything like that. So I just want to pull away, because that feels safer to pull away.
I've been smiling this whole time because I'm just thinking about this exact scenario that I was in, where someone who was just so hot and cold. It's like, that Katy Perry song just keeps coming up, that hot and cold. And it's really interesting.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, because I was actually at a pub with him the other day having a drink, and he was talking about his parents breaking up when he was really young. And he said, he asked his mom, and he said, hey, mom, like, I really need to know, like, I've never heard the story. What happened? But I'm not going to go into the whole story. But basically what had happened was she had a childhood trauma. Something triggered the childhood trauma with her now ex-husband. And then as soon as that happened, she shut down, and then relationship eventually ended after 2 years. And I just remember thinking, there is so much trauma out there, so much generational trauma, so much stuff that's gone on in our parents' lives. So really they're just doing the best they can with what they have. And the reason why I want to mention this is because I feel like, all of this work that we're talking about, if we don't take responsibility for our own behavior and do it, even though we probably might have some of that trauma and all these attachments from our parents, experiences, then nothing will change, right? It's like, we have to kind of break that cycle and put the work in.
Yes.
And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable.
It is. It's not easy. It is uncomfortable. It is. It takes it can be scary to actually like start to unpack everything.
Yeah.
Which is why it's helpful to have someone there to help unpack all these things, and to do it slowly, because we don't want to rush through the process, because it could be a lot to kind of like look at it, and
What is secure attachment? This is just so fascinating. What's secure attachment?
Yeah. So secure attachment, like that, as an infant, you would have, and in your childhood, you would have had a parent who was consistently, for the most part, right? I know no one can always consistently be there, but for the most part, they were consistently available. They were a source of safety. You could rely on that parent because they were going to be consistent and available for you. They were emotionally attuned to your needs. So you grew up feeling pretty secure about the world and people and in your relationships. Like, you feel okay. You don't feel like it's going to be the end of the world if someone breaks up with you or if someone gets too close to you. You're okay with both a distance and closeness. It doesn't activate anything for you. You don't shut down or you don't get anxious. You're, you're able to express your needs. And you trust that your needs will get met, right? And you trust that because you might be in relationships with others who also have more of that secure attachment as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that one sounds like, would it be fair to say that one's kind of like something that you can work with, something that's a bit healthy and able to.
Exactly. And that is right. So that is the goal. Because these aren't fixed, like fixed meaning like that's how it is, that the goal is to turn towards more of that secure attachment. So with someone who has like an anxious attachment, right? And one of the things that I do want to bring up, someone with an anxious attachment, their conscious fear, right? The fear that they're aware of is that fear of abandonment and rejection. Right. Their unconscious fear, interestingly, their unconscious fear is actually being emotionally vulnerable and emotionally intimate. that's really their unconscious fear, because if I'm truly emotionally vulnerable with you and truly share my needs and my feelings, or how these, or how something made me feel, what if you leave me? What if by me expressing, you get upset and mad and then you leave, right? That's the unconscious fear for someone with an anxious attachment. So then when someone with an avoidant attachment, their conscious fear is like the closeness, right? Like you're getting too close. That emotional intimacy, like that's too much, like that doesn't feel safe. However, their unconscious fear for the avoidant attachment is the fear of abandonment and rejection. It's like, I don't want to get too close. It's the same thing. It's flipped. It's like, I don't want to get too close, because what if you leave? If I actually open up to you, like, what if you leave? So I'm not going to do that. So again, these are conscious and unconscious fears. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to shift to more of that secure attachment. And so someone then with an anxious attachment style, they would slowly start shifting more towards what's called like self-regulation, meaning when they're in this anxious state, usually what they want to do is they want to seek externally, like, well, let me reach for my phone and let me call and let me send the text message, let me do X, Y, and Z. And it's more so like, how can I, going back into like, how can I get back into my body? What is it that I need? Like that thing, right? Mm-hmm. To kind of get myself calm just a little bit, at least. And then from there, then they're getting more secure, right? Grounded. And then it's about for them to trust the connection that they have with this partner. Assuming, as you said, I think you mentioned earlier, assuming that the partner is a healthy, secure partner, right? Not someone who's lied to them and is like unhealthy and like it's toxic relationship. And obviously that's not going to feel safe. It doesn't make sense, right? But assuming that this partner that they're with is actually there, it's available for them, and maybe they're just having the fears because of the past and all of that, then that person's role is, how can I trust the connection? So how can I bring in some self-regulation to calm myself down, right? And also, how do I trust the connection that I have with my partner? Let me remember earlier today that he texted me. Let me remember the moment that we spent yesterday that was pleasant. So it's kind of bringing back these positive connections that you had earlier that day or the day before, to slowly start shifting more to that secure attachment. Mm-hmm. And then someone with more of an avoidant attachment, because they like to keep to themselves, right? When they get activated, theirs is about, how do I shift towards the connection? So instead of like disconnecting, how do I shift towards the connection little by little? Because it might not feel safe for them to do so, right? Because they're not used to that. So how do I just little by little allow myself to maybe be present when my partner's sharing something, or maybe I share a little something with my partner, maybe a little bit of vulnerability or something, right? How do I do that? How do I shift towards the connection and feel, slowly working myself to that? Yeah. Because it's all about safety. Like, we don't want to force it to happen, right? We need to acknowledge that these are survival mechanisms, these attachment styles. And so it's slowly shifting towards that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like when I'm hearing you speak, and there's just so many complexities to relationships, and so much, like so many little hang-ups that happen. I'm going to tell a quick story. I was seeing this guy once, and he came back from a month. He'd been away for a month, and we were both really missing each other. And he came back, and it was in the last kind of, COVID scene, and he had to get a COVID test. He couldn't come back into the state without getting a COVID test, which means he had to self-isolate. So anyway, I hadn't heard from him. I messaged him the night, like he'd come home, and I messaged him, and I didn't hear anything from him. And I was like, whatever, I'm not going to make anything up about it. I'll just go to sleep. The next day though, I didn't hear anything from him. So I was like, okay, I messaged him and I was like, hey, like, how's it going? Like, is everything okay?
Right.
And then nothing back. And then I was a couple of hours later, I was like, okay, I'm starting to get worried now, because he's supposed to be quarantining. So like, what's going on?
Right.
And I messaged his housemate and said, hey, is so-and-so here? Can you check for me? He's like, yeah, he's not here. I checked. And I was like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, he's not here. And I was like, where could he have gone? He's supposed to be in quarantine.
Right.
So I was starting to panic. I'm like, okay, something's gone wrong. Like something's happened.
Right.
Anyway, flash forward, he finally messages me and calls me and he's like, hey, and I'm like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah,
and he's like, oh, nothing. I just wasn't near my phone. And I was like, what is going on? This is such weird behavior. Anyway, he'd been out of the state for a month. And I was kind of like racking my brain going, what's going on? Did his, I know if his ex-girlfriend's called him before, he's been thrown, his behavior gets a little bit thrown. And I asked him, have you been speaking to your ex? And he's like, no, I haven't. And he's like, that's a weird question. And I'm like racking my brain. And then I'm like, okay, what's the one thing that he hasn't been able to do because he's been out of state? And I was like, smoking weed. He's been smoking weed with his first love. And I was like, that everything just made sense. Because I was like, and so I was going through all this stuff in my head and I was going, I know there's something off, but he's saying nothing's off. What was it? And I was like, it's the first time he smoked weed in a month. And when he smokes weed, he just wants to be in his own world and not answer his phone. So I was like, I was just like, okay, everything just came down. Because I was like, suddenly everything was just explained. And I just thought it was such a fascinating experience kind of being in it and having that realization and going, okay, there is an answer here. I just don't know what it is. Because I kept asking him, like, something's not right. Like something feels different.
Right. And that's so interesting that you picked up on it, like intuitively, like there's something off. I'm going to listen to that. I don't know what it is, but there's something here.
Because I kept asking him, like, what's going on? Like something. And he was like, he couldn't think of it because he was like, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I said, oh my gosh, you're stoned, aren't you? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, oh, that's what it is.
That's what it is. Yeah, exactly.
And I just hadn't spoke to, and I don't mind. I don't, I didn't have a problem with that, but I was just like, everything made sense. And the reason why I'm explaining this, because I was just thinking, God, there were so many ways that could have gone with me freaking out. Something's going on, this, making all these things up that didn't exist. When the answer was, okay, there is some substance intervention here or some use. So it's definitely, so I wasn't going, first of all, I wasn't going nuts, it was happening.
Right.
He wasn't actively trying to hide it from me. He just didn't put the pieces together.
Right. That's so interesting.
Yeah. I just thought, wow, that was just such a lesson for me. Because I was like, okay, trust. Because I kept, in those moments, I guess what happened to me is I don't trust myself. I'm like, hang on a second. My intuition's saying something's off, but he's saying, and that's where the incongruency with my own feelings happens. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to explain that, because I just thought, there's, I was right as in something was off. I just couldn't figure out what it was.
Exactly. Right. And so you brought in like that a curiosity about like, well, let's see what it could be, because I know that something's here. So I think that piece is also important, like a little bit of that, like curiosity and exploration, because you didn't like ignore what you were feeling. It was more like, well, let's kind of like take a look here because I know I'm feeling something. And so
something's going on. And also as well, like, my reaction was as well, like, because I was like really worried when I called him. I was like, I was so worried about you, like, and then I didn't message him back because I was like, there's a couple of ways this could go. I could be really angry at him, which I really try not to be angry because I just don't want to put that anger in my body. But also as well, but then I was like, my reaction was actually I was hurt because I was like, because his COVID test was clear. And I was like, you didn't think to even tell me, I haven't seen you for a month. But the fact that he was stoned, to me, I was like, it makes sense. I'm not as straight away. Everything just was like, oh,
what a relief.
Yeah. You're just smoking some weed. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And he didn't think to say it because why would he,
Right. Like,
Yeah. So anyway, I just was that, just hearing all of this talk about like, just all this stuff that goes on in our heads and like sifting through it all. And I just think your advice on being the watcher, noticing that, I say that I've got a course called 30 Days of Self-Love in Action. And that's one of the steps is what do you notice? What are you noticing?
Amazing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So how can we, obviously there's, people who can guide us through this, such as yourself.
Right.
How do people, like, first of all, how do people find you or know what to do? Like, if they're like, okay, this is interrupting my life. I'm at the point where I've noticed that I'm either have codependent tendencies, or I have, I'm quite anxious and I have this anxious attachment.
Right.
How do I kind of get to a place where I can work through that or start working through that? What are the steps?
Yeah. I do think it's important to, whether it's a mentor, a coach, practitioner, therapist, someone to help guide you through that, especially because we're talking about, if there's been codependency, you may have had some, may or may not have had some type of trauma in childhood, right? Whether that was like your needs were always ignored or domestic violence or something, right? So that, and then if we're talking about anxious attachment, those are, we're going to say, transformed or healed in relation to another person. That could be a coach, a mentor, a therapist, someone, because if there's been trauma in regards to, like, let's say codependency or just anxious attachment, or any attachment, but in this case, anxious attachment, we're able to shift and heal through a relationship with someone else, someone who's also safe. Right. And so usually that might be working with a practitioner or a therapist or a coach to help you and guide you and unpack that. Right. And so it's looking like that. To get started, I guess it would be, as I mentioned before, like just trying to see, like just doing like the basics of like, what is it that I might need right now? Noticing also, how is it, if we're talking about anxiety here and stress, or, where does it look like in my body? Because we always want to bring it back to the body. And I said little by little, because sometimes it could feel overwhelming to do that all at once. So starting to get connected with your body, like that's really like the main thing here. It's connection to yourself, because anxiety and codependency, you get lost in the other person. So you lose yourself. There's no sense of self. So it's like slowly getting back to connection to yourself through what's happening in your body, because your body understands it through a felt sense experience, which means that we want to get in touch with the sensations in the body of how these emotions are communicating to us. Because if we just kind of keep it up here intellectually, and intellectually looks like reading the books, which is helpful, right? It's helpful to do these things because we do need context. But the other big piece here is, okay, now what's happening internally in my body? How do I start noticing how emotions manifest themselves physically in my body? Like, I would say, like, that's like an important step there. Like, when I'm feeling something, can I feel it for a little bit? And how does it manifest in my body? Can I just notice it? Because we want to be acknowledged and seen and heard, but our emotions want that as well. And so that's what we're doing. And then that's how we're building a connection back with ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like like we were talking about before, it's the constant work, isn't it, of being aware and being noticed and noticing and coming back to it if we fall off. Because I think it's like anything, right? You fall off, you get kind of, I don't even know if fed up's the word. Like, I'm kind of likening it to something like dieting, where you're like, oh my God, I'm so over this. And then you come back to it. You're like, well, I actually feel better when I do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cause in reality, like, there's going to be stressors in life. Like, you might experience heartbreak. Like, there's going to be things that are going on in general. And so you want to ensure, like, how do I bring in some regulation, right? Regulation meaning, how do I feel more safe in my body, more calm, more relaxed, more grounded, more secure? And it's by starting to check in with yourself whenever you feel off balance, or whenever there's a stress that happens or something. It's always like connecting back with yourself. That relationship with yourself.
Oh my gosh, Tana, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I've just got, I just want to ask you, is there any like kind of last words of wisdom that you wanted to impart on anyone who may feel like they are codependent, or they're in a relationship with someone who is codependent, or with anxious attachment?
Yeah. I mean, the words of wisdom, I guess I'd like to impart is that there's nothing the matter with you. There's nothing wrong with you for being in a codependent relationship or having these codependent behaviors or feeling anxious or feeling, anxiety in your relationships. This is the way that your body has adapted to survive, right? So in codependency, your body has adapted to survive in being in a role of that rescuer, fixer, caretaker, right? Or in anxiety and anxious attachment, your body has adapted to survive in regards to wanting to just cling on and connect with someone because there's a fear of abandonment. So just knowing that like your body is to protect you and it's doing what it can, but now your role, right, is to let your body know, hey, you know what? Actually, we're adults. We don't need that protection anymore. We're safe now, right? And how do we get more into stepping more into feeling more safe in our bodies and more secure?
I love
so
that.
Knowing that your body is not failing you, there's nothing wrong with you. It's doing what it's supposed to do.
Right. It's doing what it's learned. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Tana. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I like to hang out on Instagram. So my handle is @loves.hustle, HUSTLE. And I also have a free anxious attachment masterclass that you can click the link in my bio on Instagram to catch that. And my website, www.loveshustle.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course.
It's been
Thank you
awesome.
so much for having me on here.
Oh, it's awesome. I just was like, oh no, I'm running out of time. I have to wrap it up. It sucks because there's so much to talk about.
There's so much. I know. This is great though. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And for anyone listening, you can find all the links mentioned in this episode at rebellove.com/EP29. Thank you again, legend.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rebel Love podcast, the podcast about love, sex, relationships, and money. If you like this episode, please support us by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. And find all the details of this episode and more at rebellove.com/podcast.